Hello, I'm Eileen McHugh with the BBC News. The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has said the people of Afghanistan face perhaps their most perilous hour following the Taliban takeover a month ago. He was speaking at an emergency aid conference in Geneva where more than $1 billion was pledged. Much of the money is earmarked for the World Food Programme. Its executive director, David Beasley, outlined the vast scale of need in Afghanistan.
14 million people, 1 out of 3 are marching to the brink of starvation. They don't know where their next meal is. And on top of that, you have 14 million people in what we call IPC level 2 that's knocking on that same door. So if we're not very careful, we could truly enter into the abyss in catastrophic conditions worse than what we see now.
The agency said none of the donated money or food would go to the Taliban, but directly to people in need. The UN Human Rights Chief, Michelle Bachelet, has said gross violations are still being perpetrated by all sides in Ethiopia's Tigray conflict. She warned that the country was at risk of being torn apart. Ms Bachelet was speaking after field trips by investigators working with Ethiopia's Human Rights Commission.
We have received disturbing reports that local fishermen found dozens of bodies floating along the river crossing between Western Tigray and Sudan in July. Some allegedly had gunshot wounds and bound hands, indications that they might have been detained and tortured before being killed. There are continued reports of large-scale arbitrary detentions of ethnic Tigrayan civilians in unofficial sites in Western Tigray.
The UN Rights Chief also highlighted allegations that Tigrayan forces were recruiting child soldiers and attacking civilians in neighbouring regions. Officials in Burkina Faso say an ambush of a military convoy escorting fuel tankers from a gold mine near the border with Niger has left 6 officers dead. The regional government in eastern Burkina Faso blames suspected jihadists. Peru's Defence Minister Walter Ayala has said that the body of the former leader of the Shining Path rebel group should be cremated to prevent his grave from becoming a shrine for extremists. Abimael Guzman, who was 86, died in prison on Saturday. Leonardo Rocha reports.
Guzman was the founder of the Maoist group that led a bloody insurgence against the Peruvian government in the 1980s and 90s. 70,000 people are estimated to have died in the conflict. The Peruvian defense minister said that Guzman's ashes should be spread at an undisclosed location in the Pacific Ocean. A decision will be taken by the prosecutor's office, which is under pressure from politicians and relatives of victims. Guzman's widow, Elena Iparraguirre, wants his body to be buried by a former member of the Shining Path. She's in jail serving a life sentence for terrorism and treason.
BBC News. A fake press release has caused turmoil in the market for a cryptocurrency, Litecoin. The value of all such currencies rose sharply after news emerged that the US retail giant Walmart would allow customers to use a digital alternative to the dollar. Walmart soon confirmed that it hadn't issued the press release. The value of Litecoin and other cryptocurrencies fell as sharply as they'd risen. Israel's Prime Minister Naftali Bennett has described his talks in Egypt with President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi as very good and important. Speaking after the first official visit to Egypt by an Israeli leader for a decade, Mr Bennett talked of a deep connection between the two countries. Egypt said ways to revive the Israeli-Palestinian peace process were discussed, but analysts say imminent progress is unlikely. Pope Francis has told Jewish leaders in Slovakia of his shame at the murder of more than 100,000 Slovakian Jews during the Second World War. On the first full day of his visit, he lit a candle at the Holocaust Memorial in Bratislava and condemned what he called the frenzy of hatred of that time, as well as present-day anti-Semitism.
Here in this place, the name of God was dishonoured. For the worst form of blasphemy is to exploit it for our own purposes. Here, reflecting on the history of the Jewish people, marked by this tragic affront to God, we admit with shame how often his ineffable name has been used for unspeakable acts of inhumanity.
Slovakia's wartime government was led by a Roman Catholic priest, Josef Tiso. He was executed after the war for treason. Opposition activists in Russia have reported further restrictions on independent information in the run-up to the general election this weekend. An aide of the exiled Kremlin critic Mikhail Khodorkovsky said the telecoms regulator Roskomnadzor had blocked a website giving information about candidates. BBC News.